Now I'm finally right here with you. Now I'm finally right here with you.
Man. Woo. Hello everyone and good afternoon. My name is Gavin. If you are a returning subscriber, welcome back to the channel. And if you are new to the channel, we welcome you here as well. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button because we have a lot of fun here. Now today we are out for a drive in my 1999 BMW E36 M3. And appropriately so, because the car that we are going to be talking about today, the new Toyota Supra, is a joint venture between Toyota and BMW. Now, as the title suggests, I have a few things that I do want to talk about, or about this new concept. But before we dive into it too deep, I want to talk about what we know so far about the new Toyota Supra, or I believe it's the FT1 concept that it's going to be based off of. Now, unfortunately, we really don't know too much about the new Toyota Supra. We have seen it running around in camouflage, and we have seen what the concept looks like. We've also seen what the new Z4, which is going to be the sister car to this Supra, looks like in its concept. So, fortunately, there are a few small details that we do know about this new Toyota Supra, well, this soon-to-be new Toyota Supra, and I'm going to go ahead and go over those few details right now. The things that we do know is that, as I mentioned before, it is a joint venture between BMW and Toyota. We know that it's going to be a rear-wheel drive two-door, and you know, some of the stuff may change in the future as more information comes out. I wouldn't be surprised if they had an all-wheel drive model or something like that, but for now, that's what we know. We also know that it's going to have two different engine options. A four-cylinder, most likely a four-cylinder turbocharged engine, and a straight six turbocharged engine, both of which will most likely be sourced from BMW and not Toyota engines. Now that makes sense for them just because it helps save them money. That's why people do, for the most part, why companies do joint ventures together, so that they can combine each other's assets and each other's knowledge and save a little money and putting a car in a market that they might not have entered on their own. We also know that it will come with an automatic or a manual transmission. But honestly, with all that I've mentioned so far, which isn't that much, that's about all that we know. We have been hearing about this car for a long time. There's been pictures of the concept out for a long time. We've been seeing some test mules running around. Now, with the information that we have, it may seem like it's going to be an awesome car. I mean, think about the old Toyota Supra, the Mark IV Toyota Supra, the one that everybody really thinks of when you hear the name Supra. That car had an available turbocharged inline six-cylinder engine, the 2JZ, which has really, that's the engine, that engine is what made the Toyota Supra so legendary. If it wasn't for the 2JZ, that car may not be as respected and as sought after as it is today. Now, some of the obvious things that we can see that show that that 2JZ was such an important part of that car, just an important part of Toyota, was that people swap that engine in a lot of stuff when they want to make big power. Now, without the 2JZ, the Toyota Supra, the older Mark IV Toyota Supra, may have, I'm sure, would have still been an awesome car, just maybe not as awesome as we know it today. It's historical, I guess I could say. Now, before we dive too much into that, I need to talk about what kind of brought my attention to my opinion about what could happen, a possibility of what could happen with this new Toyota Supra if they don't do it right. Now, in order to get to that point that I would like to make, we do need to talk about the Acura NSX. So the older Acura NSX, let's talk about that one first. The one that probably most of you think of when you hear NSX. So that car was another rear-wheel drive two-door. It had a V6 engine that produced, you know, somewhere between 250 to 270 horsepower, just kind of depending on the year that you got it. And it was a light car, a lot of fun to drive. Its main, its main feature that you would think of wasn't necessarily huge power, and neither was the Toyota Supras in a stock form, but it was just a very good handling car. It was simple and really fun to drive, and that's why people remembered it. So then we get this concept, this new NSX concept from Acura. And so when people think of that, when people think of what this concept was going to turn into, I think most people were hoping that it would turn into something a lot like the old NSX, the NSX that people fell in love with. So for years and years, Acura just kept teasing people with this new NSX. We didn't really know too much about it. It seems like they kept changing things. It took them a lot longer to come out with this car than everyone expected. And so because of that, it built up a lot of hype. We knew that it would have over 570 horsepower, that it would have a twin turbo V6 engine along with 3 electric motors, and it would have all-wheel drive. It sounds a lot different than the older NSX that we know of, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. As technology advances, you want the new stuff to trickle down into the cars and experience that new technology. But I think there's a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it. And in my opinion, Acura chose the wrong way to do it. And I think that kind of shows. It kind of shows because there are a ton, if you look online, a ton of brand new NSXs or just lightly used NSXs that people are trying to sell that just aren't selling. And the biggest mistake that I think Acura made was by going too far away from the roots of the NSX. It was somewhat of a disappointment to people when it came out. I remember watching the first Motor Trend video, I think it was Motor Trend, of the NSX, where they talked about because it had a steer-by-wire system, meaning that the steering column wasn't connected to the wheels through a traditional rack and column to give you that type of connection that you usually get and expect from a car, as well as the brakes. The brakes are also brake-by-wire. There's not hydraulic lines that are totally connected to your feet and to the brakes. So some of it felt a little synthetic and fake because it is. And I'm sure it takes some crazy technology to be able to mimic how things should feel mechanically when they're not mechanically done. So those were a couple things that I knew that they had said were big disappointments. It didn't have the same type of precision and steering feel that the older NSX had. There's a lot of technology in that car, almost too much. And I think that's just because, like I mentioned, people expected it to be like the older NSX. Now, is the car still the new NSX? Is it still a good car? Yes, it is, and it's still pretty dang fast. But a car just being, I don't know, being a good car and being fast isn't what's going to sell it, especially an iconic name like the NSX, an iconic car like the NSX. I think a lot of people that wanted the new NSX were people who might have been enthusiasts about the old one. And so instead of being totally revolutionary and new, I think most people really were hoping that that car would be more evolutionary and kind of be along the same lines as that old NSX. Essentially, I think when people drove it, they wanted it to remind them of the older car, and it just really doesn't do that. And so that's where I think that Acura made the mistake. Now this car is, well, it starts around I think 160,000, but if you look online, most of them are spec'd around 200,000. So when you're thinking about cars that you can buy in that $200,000 range, there's a lot of other things that come into the picture that are a little more fun to drive than the NSX, or may just, I don't know, may just be a little more appealing. And with that price range of $200,000 and the Acura only having 573 horsepower, there are a lot of other cars that make that number seem not so great. And it's pretty crazy that we live in a time where 573 horsepower seems a little low. But just look at Nissan and the GTR. You can get a Nismo GTR with 600 horsepower, and that's just on the V6 twin turbo alone. No electric motors. And remember, the Acura has 3 electric motors. But anyways, this video isn't about the Acura. Let's get on to how this NSX relates to what I hope doesn't happen with the new Supra. So as I mentioned before, the old Toyota Supra is mostly known because of its 2JZ motor. Now what was so awesome about the 2JZ is that it was dead reliable and bulletproof. Now in the stock form, it didn't make a ton of horsepower, around 300, but what you were able to do is swap single turbos on there, or just up the boost and tune them, and make them much more powerful than they were stock, even more than double the horsepower, and they would still stay reliable. I would argue, like I mentioned before, that if it didn't come with that 2JZ, if it didn't come with that engine that was so able to handle much more horsepower, that it wouldn't have developed the type of history and the type of desirability that it did. I'm sure they still would have sold some, but it wouldn't be worth that same $100,000 or more that a lot of those are going for these days. And it definitely wouldn't have the reputation that it has. It would have just been a good sports car like any other good sports car that over time there still would be a crowd following it, but nothing like there is today. I would also argue that the spirit of the Toyota Supra is that 2JZ. That's what people love about it. And because of that engine, it allowed the Toyota Supra to be one of the early birds in the high horsepower game. One of the first cars to really start hitting that 800 wheel horsepower mark, 900 wheel horsepower mark, and stay reliable for it. I guess a point that I'm trying to make as well is that that car wasn't a dead success, and it didn't become this hugely famous car right off the bat. It took some time, it took some years, and it took the aftermarket community to really point out what was so great about the car. Now, was the Supra a car that handled well? Yes. Was it a car that was fun to drive every day? Yes. But that's not what made it famous. But In order for a car to become iconic, it needs more than that. Now here's where we get into my fears about the new Toyota Supra. So we do know, like I mentioned, that these engines are going to most likely be sourced from BMW. BMW does make really good straight six engines. They've been making them for a long time and they really have never stopped. Let's think about an engine called the N54. That's an engine that has come in 335s, 135s, and a few other cars. And it's an engine that is somewhat like the 2JZ in that you can bolt on big single turbos and they can make quite a bit of power and stay reliable. Now I'm not talking about like Evos, where people think you can just bolt on a big turbo and make a ton of power, and you can, but it's not going to stay reliable. These engines do, these N54s, at least for the most part, and so do the 2JZs. But I don't think that those N54s, you could turn them up as much as the 2JZ and have it stay reliable. Now I guess what I'm saying is that Toyota and BMW can come together and they can make a really good sports car. They can make one that handles well, has sharp steering, is light and nimble on its feet, and just a great car to drive on the road and the track. That's going to make it a car that people buy, but it's not going to make it a car that's really going to touch the soul of the old Supra and really make people want that car just as bad as the old one. If they do something like just make a good, I don't know, a generally good sports car, is going to be just something that people like, something that people buy, something that people will enjoy, but that name, just like the NSX, isn't going to mean as much as it does to the older car. Now with the Toyota Supra, with that name, there is a lot that this new car has on its plate. It has to uphold a lot of what this old history was in order to keep people satisfied, in my opinion. And what I'm afraid of is that they're just going to make a sports car, just make an alright good car, and then it will have the same fate as the newer NSX, with slow sales and really a loss of that the magic of that name of the car. So I would argue that if Toyota and I guess BMW don't do what needs to be done in order to maintain that same type of passion for the car based on the Mark IV Supra, that they're going to lose a lot of interest. And I think that there is a lot of hype behind this new Supra with this FT1 concept, just like there was with the NSX, because we've known that they're going to be making this car for a while, so a lot of people speculate. As you start to talk about it more and more, that hype builds up and builds up, and they really cannot afford to disappoint people with it. Basically, they're going to need another 2JZ. I mean, I don't know if they're going to do it. Does that mean that if they don't do something like that, make an engine that's capable of handling much more than stock horsepower levels and staying reliable, that it's going to be a crappy car or it won't sell at all? No, it doesn't mean that at all. But I think that they'll be missing the mark if they don't. Now anyways guys, that's just my opinion. That's kind of what I saw with the NSX and what I think could happen with the new Toyota Supra, and I hope it doesn't happen. Let me know your opinion down in the comments about what you think Toyota has to do to make a car that's going to uphold that same name as the Mark IV Supra. Maybe you share similar thoughts that I do. Maybe they're totally different. Maybe you think I'm missing something. Basically, I think that this new Supra Z4 car is going to have more than just the normal things that make a sports car good. It's going to need something special that makes it stand out from the rest. But anyways, guys, I think that's going to do it for today. If you enjoyed today's video, give it a big thumbs up. If you want to see more treats on the streets before you go, you can click these two videos here. And if you haven't already, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, and I will see you guys next time. And if you're not new to the channel, you'll know that I can't leave you guys without having a little bit more fun. And here we go with that.